Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Success Insight podcast. Our guest today is Holly A. Sharp. Holly is the author of the Dream It and Do It book series. Now, the Dream It and Do It series is the winner of the 5 out of 5-star Reader's Favorite Award. Congratulations there. And a little more about Dream It and Do It. It was inspired by Holly's desire to introduce children to a wide range of career possibilities at a young age. The series expands children's interest by using bedtime stories about real and modern people to make learning about the future fun. Holly, welcome to the Success Insight podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Fantastic. Now, I would love, for our listeners, if you could provide just a little context about your background and what was this aha moment that I'm going to have a book series? I want to write a book or a series of books. So tell us a little bit about that.
I am a first-time author, so this was not something that, I went to school and studied to be. There was definitely an aha moment. I spent my career, so the last 15 years, in new product development for various Fortune 500 companies and for startups both here and in China. And about a year ago, I found myself 8 months pregnant and without a job. As I was preparing to have a baby and for my various baby showers, I was being asked by my moms and sisters and girlfriends what kind of books I wanted to fill my baby's library with. And I was looking for things about feminism, about diversity, about bullying, and about possible career choices. And I know that having not even a baby born yet, it already shows you how type A I am, that I was looking for that kind of book. But as I searched, I found some wonderful books that were about specific careers. So Iggy Pack, a lot of really great biography type books like Rebel Girls and the Who Is series. But what I really was trying to find was something that put together in an organized way the rainbow of possibilities that kids have that they may not be exposed to at a young age. So if, our daughter, my husband and I both study business, but there's certainly a lot more things that she could do. So given my experience in new product development, I kind of know what that tingle in my tummy feels like when I feel like I'm onto something that might be missing from the marketplace. So I sat down during the last 2 months of my pregnancy and kind of plotted out what would this look like? Can I actually do this? Does this make any sense? And then when COVID hit, I kind of thought, what a great opportunity to actually bring this thing to life. And so that's how I've spent the last year, is writing this thing. And then I launched it around Thanksgiving.
Sounds like a fantastic journey. And I really have to admire, you're really on the last months of the pregnancy and thinking about these kinds of topics. And just given your background in the product development, sounds like you may have come across artistic roles, helper, discovery roles, business development roles. And how did you start to settle on those topics for the book? So there are 3 books in the series for our listeners. There's Artistic Role Models for Boys and Girls. That's volume 1, and that's made out of up of 29 stories. The Helper and Discovery Role Models, and that's made up of 40 stories, and Business and Product Development, which is right up your alley, 31 stories. How did those 3 topics come about for you? How did you settle in on those?
It really started with the people, and that was what was most important to me. During the last 2 months of my pregnancy, where frankly, I wasn't doing much anyways, I did a ton of research about all of the different documentaries and autobiographies and talks that people had given over the last 5 years, because it was really important to me that as I did my research, that I got to know this person in their own words. I tried to avoid anything written about them, so biographies versus autobiographies, and I really wanted to hear who they were in their own voice. So I just started collecting lists of people who had told their story. And then as I, was narrowing that list, it was also important to me that they were modern. So, obviously what a photographer looks like today is different than what a photographer would have looked like in the 50s, right? Then as I made sure that, everyone on this list is someone who is around today, or at least is part of our modern history, the final thing I made sure was that this was a diverse book. It was really important to me that all sorts of kids could see themselves in this book. And so as I used those different ways of narrowing, the list kind of made itself. And then because of my bit of a type A personality, I didn't feel like enough to me to just tell 100 stories. I felt like I needed to put them in some sort of collected order so that, kids could see like, hey, maybe, I feel artistic and I love all of these different ways of bringing my creativity to life. So I wanted kids who are interested in like the creative type of jobs or the scientific type of jobs to be able to kind of narrow in on who their role models might be.
And when you started to craft the outline, the structure for these books, was there a kind of a template or a pattern for those? And I asked this because before we actually started the podcast, you had mentioned you'd listened to a couple episodes, and it probably will take 2 or 3 episodes to realize that the framework is fairly straightforward. There's an introduction, there's the body, and then there's this ending that invites the listeners to learn more about my guest, and especially the children's book authors, et cetera, or authors in general, et cetera. What was the structure for each one of the stories about the role model?
Yeah, this took a couple of stories to kind of get into the groove. And I worked with my editor pretty closely on this. And where I kind of vetted out in terms of a structure, now that I look back, I'm very happy we ended up here, is each story starts by explaining what the profession is. Some of them are pretty self-explanatory, like what's a photographer? But, ask someone to explain to you what an astrophysicist does or what a material engineer does. And I think you'll find that's a little bit harder to do. So every story starts with a very, very basic explanation of what it means to do this job. And then what my editor referred to as fables is kind of how she likes to think about my stories, because they, take each role model and really bring to life what their childhood was like. And I would say, almost every single story kind of starts with their childhood and talks about how the person used their childhood or what they were interested in or the influences that they have to become the person that they were today. And most of the time I talk a little bit about like what they do today, and usually in a story format of something that happened to them that made them good at their job or that made them particularly successful. And then each one ends with an invitation for children to go do something, so to take some action. So what are things that, you don't have to wait to be a grown-up to do? And for me as a new mom, this was something that I think is really cool, where I had these daydreams of, Ronnie, my daughter, getting older and, being bored on a Saturday afternoon and saying, you know what? Go grab the book and pick a story and we're going to go do the activity. And already there's been influencers on Instagram that have gotten the book and they've had their kids do activities, whether it's, putting their face of their kid on someone who does that profession, or another influencer was interested in the landscaping story. So they took out the Play-Doh and then made this huge landscape. It's really cool to me to not just read the story, but invite kids to do something with it and figure out, is this something that I'm interested in?
I love this idea of really being a part of the story. So as you just said, go beyond the words, but then act on the story itself by participating in these activities. Now, let's talk about the 3 books, the series. Talk more in depth about the artistic role models. That's volume number 1. And in the series, there's 29 short stories. Tell us a little bit more about that. And was there a particular role model that, when you were writing this particular volume, it's like, okay, I have to include this individual because they meant so much to me, or that they meant so much to somebody that I know? And so tell us more about that.
Ooh, that is a really hard one to answer because they're all like my little babies. But I think I'll give 2 answers if you don't mind. I think there's one that when I first started writing, I had heard about her, and she's, I wouldn't say particularly famous, which in this particular book does have a lot of famous people in it just by nature of being, performers and writers and designers. But I thought it was really a really cool reflection of how, careers that exist today will look different for the next generation of dreamers or frankly doers. So there's a story in here about a woman who's a journalist. Her name is Nani, and she tells the news, but it occurred to her that a lot of the stories that she was telling weren't getting enough attention despite how important they were. So she started creating a virtual reality version of the news. And her story is basically about her very first story she did this with. And she was interested in helping bring more attention to food banks. And she'd heard a story in her neighborhood of a gentleman who'd gone to the food bank and was standing in line and was so hungry, but there wasn't enough food and he ended up passing out. And the ambulance came, and it was a very moving story. But, in written word, she found that it kept getting buried wherever the story was trying to be told. So she created this virtual reality where people could be standing in line and hearing the commotion and seeing the man fall. And it really struck me as like, this is what news is going to be like for the kids reading this book. And I thought it was a really cool story to tell in terms of what the future of journalism looks like. So I really tried hard to pick people like that can help kids understand how their role today is going to be so important 10 years from now. The more selfish one is Kristen Chenoweth. I have been a massive fan of hers. I'm a huge, huge Broadway fan. So when I thought that I was going to get the opportunity to write this book, she was definitely one of the first people that I couldn't wait to get my hands on her autobiography. I've had a chance to talk with her people, which was kind of cool. Probably 2 weeks before I was laid off, I actually was 7.5 months pregnant. She did a 2-night show in New York, and I bought tickets the day before, hopped on a plane, and went out there to see her show. I love her so much, and I'm so happy about the fact that she loves working with kids, and she does a lot to help budding Broadway stars. So I knew that she would also be excited to be a part of this book. So I was very glad that she agreed to come on board.
Fantastic. And is she since read the book and her particular story?
I haven't heard back from her yet. I hope that she has. So if for some crazy reason she's listening, I would love to hear what she thinks about it. But she has read her story, and I know she was a big fan of what I wrote. So hopefully she is out there reading more of them.
Fantastic. And now that we've kind of laid the groundwork in Volume 1, let's talk about Volume 2, The Helper and Discovery Role Models. There's 40 stories here. By the way, how long are the stories? Is it 2 to 3 pages, 4 pages? What's the approximate length?
Yeah, so each one is about a page and a half. So each story has its own illustration, and none of them go over two pages. So it's about a 200-page book in a collection where they're all together. But yeah, about a page and a half.
Okay. And what are a couple stories there that jump out for you?
There's 2 women who were one of the first firefighters in New York City. And I think it's a cool story to tell because I want both girls and boys to be inspired by this book. But I think it's great for boys to see themselves in jobs that aren't necessarily always for boys, and for girls to see themselves in jobs that aren't necessarily always for girls. And so I think their story was really inspiring in terms of what they did to kind of break through what was traditionally a very male-dominated industry. And I've had the chance to talk to both women, and they're such lovely people that it was a real honor to be able to write about them and feature their story.
Very good. It's interesting as you were just describing that and the juxtaposition of a woman talking about being in what would be considered a male-dominated field and vice versa, a man being in what would be traditionally a female-dominated field. I have a friend of mine actually back in Chicago, and his son, he has 2 sons, very accomplished. The one in particular was a second-string center on the DePaul Blue Demons basketball team. And he was also going back to school to become a nurse. In fact, an emergency room nurse. So he actually, had a COVID twice this year, but he's since recovered. But I'm thinking, those are the types of role models that we need, people who are doing things and also breaking barriers. And now we have Kamala Harris, who's the vice president-elect of the United States, and talk about a role model for young girls.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time and thought of, and like I said, like, I think the most important thing I did was figure out who the people were. And then once I figured out the people, then the rest kind of fell into place, because it was really important to me that this was a book for both boys and girls where they could see themselves in non-stereotypical ways. So I really did enjoy writing that story where I think women firefighters is such a cool thing to me.
Very good. So let's talk about the volume 3, which is business and product development. That's like right up your alley, as a matter of fact. Which stories kind of jumped out for you? I mean, I know they're all special, they're your babies, but is there one or two that jump out for you?
Yeah. So within the business, so I called it the lemonade stand because I think for kids that business can be a little bit harder to understand. So at the beginning of the business section, I actually try to lay out like, what are the parts of a lemonade stand and how does each person, how are they responsible for making a lemonade stand work? My husband's favorite story in the whole book, and it's, I think, become one of mine, is the gentleman who wrote Undercover Economist. And, when I think about jobs that kids don't have a clue exist, this is one of those to me. So like, if you survey 100 kids, how many know and understand what an economist does? And it was fun to write because when you really boil down what an economist does, I was able to, think about it as being a money detective. Like they really follow the trail of money and understand why people do what they do when it comes to the exchange of goods and services. And so I talk a little bit about how, Disney World, how they choose to set their pricing based on who's attending and from where they're coming from. The other thing I talk about is his love of game theory. So when he was younger, he discovered game theory, and that really led him to becoming an economist. And I used the prisoner's dilemma to basically explain what happens when you're telling on your sibling. So both of you have a story to tell. How does it actually work when prisoner's dilemma and game theory come into play and your parents are deciding who to believe and who gets in trouble? So I have enjoyed the process of trying to take things that are harder for kids to understand and boiling them down into simple, relatable things. So I have kind of an affection for that one. So it was probably the first time that my husband read what I was doing, was like, you know what, you're doing something that someone hasn't done before. This is special. So I do have affection for that story.
Fantastic. You mentioned earlier, as you were writing these chapters, that there were illustrations. How did the illustrations come about, and what was it like working with an illustrator and bringing them on your team and helping to share your vision of what you wanted to convey?
Sure. So I interviewed a couple of people and basically started with one person and had them bring their vision for this person to life. And what I realized really quickly was that I didn't want this to come across as a fairy tale book. So I felt like the pictures that came across as whimsical either made the story seem like it was more of a picture book and for younger kids than I was intending, or that, it made the person not feel real. And one of the things that's important to me in this book is that kids can see themselves in these characters, in these real life people, and these role models. So, while they are illustrations, and I think my illustrator did a wonderful job, I wanted it to feel like someone they could recognize. So if they, tried to learn more about the person, they would recognize them from their picture versus being a little bit more whimsical, that maybe it felt like a fairy tale character. So, I hope that I found a good balance between being illustrated and making it, appealing to kids, but by the same token, feeling a bit more real so that kids felt more like they were role models than, this princess off in her high off castle.
Gotcha. And what was it like working with a publisher? And I imagine you're working with the publicists and PR to get the word out. I mean, it's tough these days because of COVID and what we can and cannot do. But what was it like working with having a team there to support you and to kind of keep the ball rolling, so to speak, to make sure you're on target, you're accomplishing what you set out to accomplish any given day, to produce these works? What was it like?
So the book is being self-published. So every person that contributed to this book, I personally hired. It was a huge learning lesson. And I think, frankly, I made some really great choices in in the partners that I brought on. And so I think that frankly, the hardest thing was that when I started writing this book, my daughter was 3 weeks old. So I've been doing this for the last 7 months alongside of raising her. So that's probably one of the biggest challenge has just been having the discipline to really use nap time as well as I could every single day. And then after the book was finished, I hired 2 women who are absolutely fantastic to help me with the publicity. And they've done a wonderful job. So, being new to the industry, I know quite a bit about product development and how to launch products, but they really helped me teach me a little bit more about how the book industry works. So this year has been a huge learning curve in terms of the industry, but I do believe I've connected with a lot of absolutely wonderful people.
Very good. Now, I would imagine now that these books have been published, they're available, there's programming around them, you've got the website, and we'll get the URL to your website shortly. What has been the lessons learned for Holly A. Sharp about this entire journey? What have you learned about yourself?
So I think the biggest thing that I've learned is that you can do so much if you commit yourself to turning off the TV. And I've had a lot of people ask me, how do you write a book and have a newborn at the same time? And to be honest, I would have never in a million years thought that this was possible. I think, frankly, a lot of people around me probably thought good, she'll have something to keep her busy. And then when the world turns back on, then, she'll go back to doing what she's done before. And, while we were unable to see friends and family, I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't turn on the TV for pleasure, or I wouldn't watch a series TV show until the book was finished. So I would watch a lot of documentaries, or I would maybe watch a movie because I knew all right, an hour and a half after I start it, it will be over and there's no more commitment. So it was probably 6 weeks ago when I finally got to watch Mrs. America, which I've been dying to watch. I really forced myself to use the free time that I had to commit to this book. And I really do love biographies and documentaries. So it didn't feel like work. And it was an easier thing to do in between nap times. And while I was going for walks, I could listen to audiobooks. So I think, what I really took away was I don't know if it gets harder than this, but if I can write 100 stories while my baby is 6 months, 2 to 8 months, then I probably can do something else if I just commit myself to doing it.
Very good. And speaking of something else, your life has changed in a number of ways. I mean, you now have a beautiful baby. You're a multi-book published author, for an award-winning author for that matter. The job situation has changed. What do you see the future looking like for you?
Honestly, I would love nothing more than to write future books that have different angles about what kids can become. I love the idea of being able to juggle motherhood and writing, and I think I've proven to myself that I can do it. I have a next book in my head already. I want to write a book with 50 kids that have done exceptional things before high school graduation, to really give kids role models that are even closer to the age they can relate to. So ideally, I would be able to spend the next 3-4 months writing the next book and continuing to inspire kids figure out what they want to be when they grow up.
Fantastic. When you are ready to embark on that journey for that next book, I'd love to introduce you to a young lady. I cannot remember her last name, but her first name is Chloe. She wrote a book of poetry and is writing her first novel. And she's, I think, if I remember correctly, she's probably 12 or 13 years old right now.
And isn't it just exceptional when you hear stories like that? You just realize that, kids have it in them. It just takes helping them figure out what those interests are or how to inspire them. So I would absolutely love to meet what sounds like a pretty exceptional little girl.
I will definitely make that happen for you. So Holly, in the time we have left, is there any other insights or ahas or, God, I would love to share this with the listening audience about this journey you've been on to produce these books, the topics, anything in particular you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, there's a really interesting book called The Childhood Roots of Happiness. And, one of the things that I think as we talk about what kids want to be, that, maybe it's the generation that I'm from, but to me, success is tied in so closely to happiness that I don't ever want my book to come across as, every kid needs to know who they're going to be at, 12 years old. But in this book, the psychiatrist that wrote it talks a lot about how, the finding something that you're interested in and acquiring the discipline to become good at it is something that no one can take away from you in adulthood. When it comes to having discipline rooted inside of you, that is something that's hard to teach yourself as an adult. So if you can learn it as a kid, you are actually more likely to be happy as an adult, because not only do you have the discipline to learn something and be good at it, but you're more likely to be able to dodge the bullets that come at you just in general life. So, I think understanding what you love and what you're good at isn't just a matter of like, oh, I want my kid to grow up and make money, but it actually increases the likelihood that your child is going to be happy if they can find something and then actually use discipline and practice to get good at it. And it really can make a huge difference in their life. So that to me is what this book is all about, more than just, quote unquote success.
As you were just describing that insight, I was reminded of, and I can't remember his name, Mike Rowe. And I know he had a couple shows up on cable, and one of his initiatives is helping individuals who don't want to go to college to get that 4-year degree, but to pursue careers in the trades. Whether it's electrical, plumbing, oil and gas, whatever. Because we don't all we can have a passion, and actually make a very good living at it and be very happy. Because I believe as a coach, we should be happy in our careers and not feel like we're doing this as drudgery day after day, but we should be working and be happy at the same time. And I think, I would imagine there's a huge series out there for young kids, hopefully with parents who are supportive at the same time, to pursue something that maybe is, in this day and age, non-traditional, because you don't have to go to school and get that 4-year degree to be happy.
Yeah. And I really tried to make that part of this book as well. So you'll find in here that there's welders, there's builders, there's people that work on public works. So I tried really to think about not just jobs that require a 4 or frankly 6-year degree, and include other careers where kids can work with their hands. Because I completely agree with you that, and frankly, like being a welder today, you can probably make more than someone who has an MBA. So I think that, teaching kids that being good at something and learning and using that to drive your happiness is as important as the education that you get to do it.
Fantastic. So Holly, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where are the best places for them to go?
So you can find me on Facebook and Instagram, and my website is dreamitanddoit.com. And I'll just call out the end because I realized that I published my website literally the night before I went in to have a C-section. So this passed me by a little bit, but the end of the website is, it's dreamit, ANDOIT.com. So you might be inclined to put in the 2 Ds. You'll probably find it eventually anyways, but it's dreamit and OIT.com.
Dream it and it. Okay, I got that. Well,
Yes.
we will most definitely provide the link to make it easy for our listeners to get access to your website. And, and I would imagine the website was probably not the first thing on your mind as you're like getting ready to go into labor,
Yeah. So, and once I had it, I actually kind of thought it was funny, and it hasn't really been a problem, but yeah, so I appreciate the extra help to get your listeners there.
Fantastic. And we will also provide the links back to your Facebook and Instagram pages as well. Holly, thank you so much for joining us on the Success Insight podcast. And, it's been a great conversation with you, and we wish you much success with your current series of books and looking forward to the new possibilities going forward.
I appreciate it. It was a pleasure. Thanks so much.
All right. Okay, folks, we've just been chatting with Holly A. Sharp. Holly's the author of the Dream It and Do It book series. And just a reminder, the Dreaming of Book series is the winner of 5 out of 5 readers' favorite award. And the idea and premise behind the series was inspired by the desire to introduce children to a wide range of career possibilities at a young age. And through these series, these 3 volumes, such wonderful opportunities to learn about role models who are perhaps pursuing both traditional and non-traditional careers in the artistic realm, the helper and discovery role models, as well as business and product development. So do go out to Holly's website, dreamit.com. Again, we'll provide the backlinks, and we're also going to provide the backlinks to Holly's author page on Amazon, as well as to her Facebook and Instagram sites as well. Okay. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Do let us know what you think by giving us some comments. Please visit us on successinsightpodcast.com. We are also on LinkedIn and on Facebook at our link Success Insight podcast pages. You can also find us on most of the podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. And you can also find us on YouTube as well. All right, folks, go out there, have a phenomenal day. We are still in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, so be safe, wear your mask, practice social distancing, take care of yourselves, be mindful of the community that you are around, and just practice that safe distancing, okay? We'll see you on the next episode of the Success Insight Podcast. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.